So, Nicola, what does focus look like for you?
I think I've been blessed with the disorder called ADHD. So if there's one topic, that probably is going to challenge me, it's this one, except under certain circumstances. So we'll talk about that hopefully.
Okay. It's funny that you brought up ADHD. I was at the breakfast table this morning discussing, sort of questions and stuff I was going to ask you. And one of my friends said to me, man, I've got ADHD. And then the lady next to him was like, I also have ADHD. I struggle to focus. And then they asked me the question. They were like, well, what is ADHD? Is ADHD actually, do we measure it on a spectrum from like focus to being, having attention deficit disorder? Because my friend was like, so I struggle to focus. However, if something interests me, I can't unfocus. I'm hyper-focused on that.
Yeah.
So, does that happen in your life as well? You either really focus on something or you're kind of like, not focused at all. All right. Hello, guys. Welcome back to the ThinkerNick Podcast. It's been a minute. We've had some technical difficulties over the last few weeks, so it's been a while since we've done one of these, so it's great to be back. Nicola, how are you doing today?
I'm well, thanks, Nick. Great to be back too.
Fantastic. Yes. So we've decided that since it's been 3 weeks since we can actually put out a podcast, we thought a great topic would be focus, as focus is an important thing in life because we need to be focused to get stuff done. So, Nicola, what does focus look like for you?
I think I've been blessed with the disorder called ADHD. So if there's one topic, that probably is going to challenge me, it's this one, except under certain circumstances. So we'll talk about that hopefully.
Okay. It's funny that you brought up ADHD. I was at the breakfast table this morning discussing, sort of questions and stuff I was going to ask you. And one of my friends said to me, man, I've got ADHD. And then the lady next to him was like, I also have ADHD. I struggle to focus. And then they asked me the question. They were like, well, what is ADHD? Is ADHD actually, do we measure it on a spectrum from like focus to being, having attention deficit disorder? Because my friend was like, so I struggle to focus. However, if something interests me, I can't unfocus. I'm hyper-focused on that.
Yeah.
So, does that happen in your life as well? You either really focus on something or you're kind of like, not focused at all.
Yeah. A friend of mine was explaining something to me the other day. She's an NLP coach, neuro-linguistic programming. And something she pointed out to me actually was she said, I have a hypersensitivity around sound. And I'm like, how did you notice? And we were sitting at a coffee shop and cars are coming past. And she said, every time a car comes past or there's a sound, your eyes move. But she said they don't just move like, oh, that's a car. She said they move very rapidly, which means the sound is a constant interruption. So I do know about myself, if you want me to pay full attention, I'm better in an environment where there's very few disruptions around noise. So I think people get distracted by different things. ADD is different to ADHD. So ADD is attention deficit disorder, and ADHD is attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder, which apparently affects more boys than girls. That's when you're hyper. They say often the girls are not so hyper as the boys. But then there's that real weird thing that if something gets your attention, someone gets your full attention, it becomes very difficult to be interrupted.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. So just going back to interest, I want to know sort of the factors or, what sort of things make people lose focus. And for sure, I would think that interest would definitely be one of them. What are some other factors do you think that we have to take into consideration when we lose focus or we procrastinate?
So I would imagine the one is interruptions. So notifications on your phone, phone calls, emails.
I literally just got one as you said that.
Ping, ping, ping.
Ping, ping.
So I think that's a very big distraction for people today. And because we're so reliant on devices to do things, that we're often looking at our phones, or you've got it linked to your laptop and a message comes up, emails constantly coming in. So when you're always online, you're never offline. And I think you always have to be offline to pay full attention and to focus. I mean, that's when you're working. It might be other things in life, like, I don't know, decorating a house, riding a bike.
Yeah. Also, if people with families, having kids, constantly being interrupted. Yeah.
Yes. And that's challenging for a parent, because you're trying to pay attention and your child keeps interrupting you.
Yeah, I'm actually staying where I am now. I'm with my friends. We're celebrating them because they're having a baby in a few months.
Oh, sweet.
And I always just keep on saying to him, mate, life's not going to be the same in a couple of months, constant interruptions. But he is a very focused guy. And actually, we were chatting about it this morning, about the strategies that we use to stay focused. Mm-hmm. And one of them is for sure to write it down. I think that's one of the most important strategies to maintain focus. And I'm actually reading that book, Atomic Habits. I've read The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg, but now I'm reading Atomic Habits. And he said the best way to, get something done is to write it down. Say, I will do this at this time. Yeah. And it needs to be written down. Otherwise, the majority of times it just doesn't end up happening. Mm-hmm. So what do you think are some other strategies that, you can put in place in your life to maintain focus?
I think what writing it down does is it helps you sort of declutter your mind. So I think another great way to maintain focus is simplify and declutter and put some structure around what you have to do. I'm a big fan of to-do lists. Even I've tried many times to do the apps, and I do still use the apps if I'm sort of on the road or I'm in a hurry, and I go back to those. But I have still found the somatic process of actually writing down a task means that I can forget about it for a while because I know I've captured it. But I'm also much more likely when I go back to that list to realize how much I've done. So write things down. The other thing is schedule time. So schedule time in your diary for specific projects or tasks. And there's a wonderful book called Eat That Frog. And it talks about sort of do the ugly things first, get the big things out of the way. And if you can tick off a whole bunch of small things quickly, you can do that. But to do the hard work, you need to pay attention. And that means no interruptions, scheduled time, seeing it through to completion. Yeah.
Yeah. And we were talking about in one of our previous podcasts about that dopamine high that you get when you tick stuff off.
Yeah.
There's just something about it. You know what I mean? You get through that list. Like if you have heaps planned for the day and you manage to get all of that done at the end of the day, you're like, wow, I've had a really productive day. Yeah. The dopamine high is there, and it's a really great feeling. So with regards to focus, obviously focus does transpire into productivity. Mm-hmm. But what is the relationship there between focus and productivity?
There's a great theory that was developed by, I'm not sure if I'm going to pronounce it right, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. He was a professor of psychology at the University of Chicago. And he wrote I think it was in the early 90s, 2 books. One was called Creativity and the other was called Flow. And in his book, Flow, he talks about challenge and skill. So when you are doing something that stretches you or challenges you, and you have the skills to be able to execute on that, then you move into a state called flow. And when you're in flow, you lose consciousness of time. So suddenly the sense of time disappears and you're being super productive, to your word and point about productivity, and you're really enjoying what you're doing, and suddenly time passes without you being aware of it. So I think when you're paying full attention and you're suitably challenged, then you're in a sort of a state of what he calls flow, but that's probably like uber focus. That's probably what's going on there. I think the small things, I've got to make this phone call, pay that bill, things like that. I'm not sure that those are hyper productivity, but it's getting rid of the small stuff so you can do that, eat that frog stuff.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm so glad that you touched on flow there, because I just want to, explain for the people who have never heard of the state of flow before or know what it is. I'll give you an example of me this morning. I went for a run and the first 2Ks were absolutely brutal. My legs were sore. The lungs were going. I didn't feel like it. It was early in the morning. And then, as you start to find your rhythm and you get going, you literally find the next 3 or 4Ks are just effortless, because you get into the state of flow and you just go and you go and you go. And again, obviously at the end of the run, the endorphins, the dopamine, it's another thing that you've ticked off, But let's sort of move into your environment now and how important that is with maintaining focus. Because like we were saying about having children and in a family, these sort of environments it's really difficult, I would imagine, so to maintain focus. So what is the impact of environment on staying focused?
The brain can only take in so many bits of information in terms of parallel processing. So environment, I think, is critical. And I think getting into the habit of sort of making your bed every day and tidying up your desk, cleaning up your inbox, getting the environment sorted, I think is very important. I personally can't work productively in an environment that's overcluttered or has got too many things going on around me. And it makes a big difference. There's an example of a company here in South Africa. It's actually called AECI, and it's an explosives factory. It makes explosives for, it does many other things today, but it used to be just an explosives factory for the mining industry, dynamite. And they moved offices, and they were in a very sort of old building, and they moved into a very much more modern building. And I'm sure it was part of their business strategy, but we've gone from being an explosives business to a full sort of chemicals technology business. And moving into that building apparently had a massive impact on employee performance, well-being, etc. And there was another great example of a company called Oticon, which make hearing aids in Europe. They were also battling financially. So the new CEO, I think his name was Lars Koland, invested himself in the business, bought some shares, and also moved the office to a brand new building. And in that building, this was before we were so advanced with internet technology, instead of having post, you used to get delivered your letters and you go to your desk and you get your post in the morning. What he did is he set up scanning machines, and all the post was scanned, and then it was distributed electronically to everybody's desk. And again, the company just rocketed to financial success. So there are many, many examples of this. And I think environment plays a huge role. There are those different spirits, people out there that can work in coffee shops. They can sit in a cluttered environment. They can be productive with 3 kids climbing over them. I'm not saying people like that don't exist, but I do think environment plays a big role if you want to get things done.
Absolutely. I remember, I'll never forget this. We were at your house in Cape Town, and we were all on holiday, and I had some uni work to do, or I had some sort of work to do, and I just couldn't sit down and do it. I just couldn't be asked to do it. And I remember my sister came in the room, and she also had some work to do. And we were literally like in the kitchen talking, chatting. Then we, I don't know, I think I was probably having a beer, just chilling out. And she literally just sat down and just started going, just started working. And you were even like, that's unbelievable. How do you do that? I was like, I was even like, how did you do that? To her advantage though, she was studying. So she was in that routine of, constantly doing that thing, which also I think plays a massive factor, is finding a routine in order to stay focused. So Nicola, here's a question from a friend of mine this morning, and she wanted to know, how does self-efficacy play into procrastination?
how does self-efficacy play into procrastination? So let's separate the two. So let's talk about procrastination first. So procrastination is putting off to tomorrow what should have been done yesterday, in short. So then the question is, why would you procrastinate? And we all do. We're all guilty of it. And it's like my AA moment. Hi, my name's Nicola. I'm a procrastinator. And so I find that most people procrastinate. So the reason then is why. And I think the reason is either it's got to be a lack of something. So it's a lack of control, a lack of motivation, a lack of skill. It might be, I think it's going to take longer. It might feel like it's going to be hard. In some instances, it's also maybe it turns out to be a really good thing and it's a fear of success. Or if I do that, it then means something else is going to happen. So now I don't want the consequence of good or bad consequence of what might happen. And then you've got this self-efficacy, which is about, really it's about self-control. So the way those would probably coalesce is self-efficacy, self-control is your ability to choose to procrastinate.
Mm.
So when you make the decision, even if it's a subconscious decision to not do something, you're making a choice.
Mm-hmm.
So you're deciding. So you can make the same choice to do something that you've been putting off. And I think that probably comes down to mindfulness, but also I think desire plays a very big role. You know, you didn't want to study, Abigail did.
Yeah.
She wanted to study because she wanted to probably get it out of the way. I've got to do this.
Yeah.
I don't know if she was studying to say, oh, I really want to learn this, because that's a different motivation.
Mm.
You know,
yeah, for sure.
But if someone's giving you an assignment and you're like, oh God, I really don't feel like doing finance. So suddenly but if somebody said, you know, I want you to tell me what Henry VIII did, and you were mad about history, it wouldn't be studying for you. You'd be like, oh gosh, I can't believe this guy chopped off his wife's head and had an affair with his sister. And you'd be fascinated. And then attention is not a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And just going back to mindfulness there, make sure to check out our episode with Tracey on mindfulness. If you guys, after this one, or when you get a second. Okay, fantastic. And now, Nicola, as I've known you for a long time, you have been a person who is very hardworking, but you don't stop working. As soon as you get up, as soon as you get in the office, you're there till the end of the day. So I want to know, is it better to maybe just, is it more productive to do 8 hours consecutively, or would it be better to maybe work in 2-hour stints, for example?
I personally, I work in sprints.
Okay.
So, and thank you for the compliment. I don't know if I'm hard work or hard working, perhaps both.
Or both, yeah.
Yeah. I actually work in sprints, with the exception of when I'm working with a client, particularly with strategy and facilitation. So I have bursts of attention, and then I need to just stand up and distract myself. There are days when I'll sit at my computer for several hours and not lift my head. But typically, I'll work in a sprint. I'll get to a certain point, and then I'll maybe grab myself a cup of coffee. And I do like to sort of engage with the human race. But if I'm overstimulated by people, I find it difficult to concentrate. So the best environment for someone like me, and I don't think I'm alone, is I need the community of people, but I need that open plan office environment is not a productive environment for me. Abigail sounds like she could just sit down and get on with it.
And just do it anyway.
Yeah. So I do tend to work in sprints, and and I learned about that actually many years ago from Tony Buzan, when he was the the father of mind maps. And he basically said you should work in, I think he used to say 45 minutes.
Yeah.
And there's now, there's a method called Pomodoro. If you download Pomodoro, and this is the idea of working in sprints, and I think Pomodoros are about 25 minutes.
Yeah.
But Buzan used to say if you're doing something for longer than 45 minutes, you're not now absorbing the information. You've got to interrupt your brain, give it a bit of rest, and then allow it to absorb some more.
Yeah. I remember this from when I was in university.
Okay.
We used to get a lot of advice from our lecturers and stuff to say, listen, you know, and I think it's the same as is it Pomodoro? Pomodoro. Yeah. And basically you used to do some intense studying for like, I think it was like 30 minutes. And then my brain literally would just stop then. Like you'd be reading it and it's just not going in. You know, when you're just reading between, like you're literally like just reading and nothing's going in. So the last question I'm going to ask you, Nicola, is basically what we do as teachers is when we're like, you know, planning assessments and stuff, we've had this conversation before. We plan the summative assessment and work backwards. So we start with the end goal in mind, and then we work backwards from that. Do you think that's a good strategy to maintain focus?
Yes. Stephen Covey wrote a book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And he had a saying, begin with the end in mind. So I think what happens is the brain can't distinguish between a vividly imagined thought and an event that actually took place. So I think if you stay focused on the outcome, then your brain and your body move naturally towards the image of that success. So if the outcome is the signed contract, if the outcome is the finished assignment, if the outcome is the published book, if the outcome is the finish line in a race, you're talking about running this morning, and you stay focused on that, then I think the energy required to move in that direction is less. But if you have to pick yourself up every day and keep moving to the next moment, which one might argue is being mindful, the sort of moment-to-moment concept, but I think that takes a lot more energy. And don't forget, the brain consumes 25% of our energy. So a huge amount of energy is consumed, kilojoules, by the brain.
Yeah.
So I'm sure you probably need nutrition, hydration, attention. I don't think focus is one ingredient. I think it's a recipe.
Yeah, for sure. Another run that I went on Tuesday was the first time we did this like interval running, where you'll run for like 2.5 minutes at a really fast pace, and then the next 2.5 minutes will be at like a slow pace. And when I saw the program was sent to me from a friend saying, this is what we're doing this afternoon, and I was, to be honest, shitting myself, to say the least, because it looked, I was like, I don't know how I'm going to do this. So in my brain, I prepared for literally the worst grueling session. And at the end of it, it was actually not so bad.
Yeah.
You know what? And I finished and I was like, you know, that was great. So I can't remember what's that saying. It's like something over deliver. When you
under promise over deliver.
Yeah, under promise over deliver. When you keep the standards low, so that, you know, it's actually really good. And Nicola, do you have any advice or any sort of readings that we could encourage the listeners to go and check out?
Okay, so you've mentioned Atomic Habits. I think that's a great book by James Clear.
Yep.
Eat That Frog. I think it's written by Brian Tracey, but Eat That Frog. It's a great book. It's easy to read and it's kind of fun.
Okay.
Another great book is a book by Daniel Goleman. It's actually called Focus, and he says the hidden driver of excellence. And that's all about paying attention. And then there was a book written years ago, actually, so it's possibly could do with a refresh, but by someone called Al Rees. And he was the co-author of probably one of the most famous books in marketing. It's called The 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing. That was written by Jack Trout and Al Rees. It's called Focus, but it's all about company focus. So we've spoken a lot today about personal focus, but there's also, what do companies pay attention to?
Yeah.
So as entrepreneurs, there's a tendency to have what we call the shiny penny syndrome. It's like, let's do this, let's do that. And I'm fortunate to have a business partner who's uber focused. I mean, superb at paying attention and doing one thing exceptionally well. But this book is also about companies that have diversified and lost their way. So it's a great read, but it's corporate based.
Okay, fantastic. Well, guys, don't forget to like, follow, subscribe, and comment. We'd love to hear from you as always. Nicola,
Okay.
thank you very much for popping in today, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Okay.
Cheers, you.
Bye.
Bye.
For more news and content about ThinkerNick, go to www.thinkernick.com or visit our Facebook or Instagram pages @ThinkerNick.